They say some people are born leaders, some are born fighters, some are born with the mysterious ability to yawn in 6 different languages. And then there's Donald. Donald wasn't born to sleep. No, he was engineered for it. His baby crib had gold trim and thermal blackout curtains. His pacifier, designed by NASA. By the age of 3, he was telling other toddlers they were using their dreams inefficiently. For most of his life, Donald slept like royalty. 7 hours, no dreams, no regrets, not even a snore. He called it executive unconsciousness. But recently, something changed. He'd lie down in one of his 17 monogrammed beds and stare at the ceiling like it owed him money. No sleep, just thoughts. Thoughts like, is soup technically a beverage? What if my pillow is plotting against me? Why are sheep the only animals we count? It was unacceptable. And so, one very awake night, around 3:17 a.m., Donald stood up, hair slightly more vertical than usual, and declared, "That's it. I'm done. I'm finding the perfect formula for sleep, the ultimate method, the final solution to nighttime nonsense." He didn't whisper it. He announced it. To no one in particular. Just the moon, a lamp, and a moderately frightened houseplant. He grabbed a golden notepad, wrote sleep formula in all caps, circled it 4 times, and underlined it with a lightning bolt. The mission had begun. Every great mission begins with research. And Donald, being a man of infinite wisdom and 0 patience, decided to start by consulting the world's most trusted source of knowledge, himself. He opened his notepad to a fresh page, wrote Phase 1 research, and stared at it like it would give him the answers on its own. Nothing happened. So, he paced, and thought, and paced while thinking, which, in his case, looked more like wandering in small circles and occasionally bumping into a decorative chair. "What helps people sleep?" he whispered, scribbling every idea that came to mind. Soft music, meditation, counting sheep, suspicious. Warm milk, suspicious and dairy. A heavy conscience, impossible. Listening to someone explain taxes. Turning off your phone, pretending you're boring. He paused, then drew a big X through turning off your phone. Absolutely not. Donald knew he couldn't rely on basic advice. He needed something next level. Something that would work not just for him, but for everyone. Even the overthinkers, the midnight snackers, the pillow flippers, the professional worriers. So, he began testing. First, he played ocean sounds, then rain, then wind, then a very realistic recording of a man yawning on loop. Nothing. Next, he tried lying upside down, then sideways, then diagonally, just in case the Earth's gravitational pull had favourites. Still nothing. At one point he even tried drinking a warm glass of almond milk while listening to whale sounds and hugging a decorative pillow shaped like a sheep named Gerald. It only made him crave sushi. And then he had an idea. A big one. What if? I ask other people how they sleep. He paused, scratched his chin, and whispered with gravitas. Focus group. Because when you're desperate for sleep, and mildly famous, obviously the next logical step is to host a sleep summit. He didn't want just any people. He wanted the worst sleepers in the world. The legends. The ones who hadn't slept properly since fax machines were a thing. He posted flyers. Not digital flyers. Actual physical flyers. On trees. In places where people walked slowly, rubbed their eyes a lot, and sighed in public for no clear reason. They read, "Can't sleep? Come talk to someone who also can't sleep. Me, Trump. There will be soup." 2 nights later, at precisely 9:12 p.m., they arrived. The first was a woman who wore 6 scarves, all labelled Monday. She said she hadn't slept in years because her dreams were too noisy. The second was a man who claimed he used to sleep, but then he blinked once and woke up in 2009. No one knew what that meant. The third was a baker who believed bread could dream, and therefore he stayed awake to make sure they didn't have nightmares. And the fourth was Gerald. Not the sheep pillow, an actual man named Gerald, who insisted he only sleeps inside cardboard boxes because walls are judgmental. Trump sat with them in a circle, each person holding a bowl of suspiciously clear soup, and asked the most important question of all. What do you do when you can't sleep? One by one they answered. I count all the things I regret, said the woman with scarves. I stare at my toaster until I cry, said the 2009 guy. I hum lullabies to my sourdough, said the baker. Gerald just made a dolphin noise and sipped his soup with intensity. Donald took notes, terrible notes. His paper looked like a spider had walked through ink, had a panic attack and died mid-sentence. But still, he felt closer. Maybe, he thought, sleep isn't about what you do. Maybe it's about what you let go of. He stared at his soup, then at the people, then at Gerald, who was now dozing off mid-sip. And in that moment, Donald realized something terrifying. He was inspired, but confused. Because if sleep wasn't about doing more, then maybe, just maybe, it was about doing less. And if there was one thing Donald was historically bad at, it was nothing. Still, the idea itched at the back of his mind like a tag on a cashmere sweater. He walked home slowly that night. No entourage, no music. Just him, the moon, and the faint scent of soup clinging to his jacket. When he got home, he stood in his giant bedroom staring at all the sleep-related things he had purchased over the years. Weighted blanket, lavender mist, a mattress endorsed by Olympic athletes and approved by 3 pandas, noise machine that sounded like wind but rich, books he'd never read, stacked neatly next to a candle labelled Nap Ambition. He turned it all off. Maybe I've been trying too hard. He crawled into bed. No phone, no noise, no pressure, just air. He stared at the ceiling and whispered for once, not like a man giving a speech to the galaxy. Let's just see what happens. And for a moment it felt peaceful. His eyelids got heavy. His breath slowed. And just when he thought he might finally drift off, his mattress made a noise, a long, slow creak, like a haunted door or a whale deciding whether to speak. He froze, then slowly, ever so slowly, opened his eyes again. Nope. He sat up, turned the lights back on, grabbed the notepad. Phase 2, sleep by distraction. He circled it 5 times. Because if doing nothing didn't work, maybe he needed to do something so dumb, so oddly comforting, so nonsensical, that his brain would finally give up and say, fine, you win, I'm out. It was time to build the ultimate distraction. Phase 2 began with the construction of what Donald called a distraction chamber. To the untrained eye, it looked like a small room filled with bizarre objects. To Donald, it was a sacred temple of sensory confusion. He wheeled in a lava lamp the size of a fridge, hung wind chimes made of spaghetti noodles, placed a single sock on a velvet pedestal, taped a photo of a cat wearing reading glasses to the ceiling, and in the centre, he positioned a recliner made entirely of recycled campaign buttons. Perfect, he whispered, as the spaghetti chimes swayed slightly in a non-existent breeze. He sat down, put on a sleep mask embroidered with the word genius, and hit play on an audio recording titled, A Man Describing Different Types of Gravel in Alphabetical Order. Within minutes his brain started short-circuiting. Did he say angular basalt or angular assault? Why is that sock looking at me? Is that lava lamp judging me? His thoughts tangled into knots. He lost track of the gravel, the time, the temperature, and just when things started to go fuzzy, he sneezed, loud, powerful, historic. The spaghetti chimes exploded into the air like wet confetti. He sat there, dazed, staring at the now empty ceiling. It's too much, he admitted, too distracting. So he did something he hadn't done in a long time, something bold, something quiet. He turned everything off again, sat in the silence. And this time, instead of fighting it, he whispered, "Okay, sleep. I'm not chasing you anymore. Come find me if you want." And then he fell asleep for 7 glorious minutes, until Gerald the box sleeper crashed through the window yelling about dream taxes. But that's another story. The next morning Donald woke up, not well rested but encouraged. 7 minutes of sleep was a personal best that week, and he didn't even dream of falling into an elevator shaft, which for him was progress. He sat at the kitchen table sipping something that claimed to be tea but smelled vaguely like warm carpet. His notepad was open. The top of the page read, "Sleep, not about trying, about tricking." Underneath, in capital letters, Must fool the brain. So he made a list of possible brain tricks, listening to lectures about rocks, watching raindrops race on windows, imagining a turtle folding laundry, telling yourself you're not tired until your brain gets petty and makes you sleep out of spite, pretending you're a potato in a warm bowl of mashed potatoes. I need to test these, he said aloud, to no one but a nearby spoon. He called it reverse psychology sleep training. That night Donald climbed into bed and whispered, I am absolutely, definitely not going to sleep. Sleep is for amateurs. I intend to stay awake forever and reorganize my spice cabinet in alphabetical order by emotional tone. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, it worked. His body relaxed, his thoughts softened, his breathing slowed, but just as the silence began to stretch into softness, his brain said, You forgot to lock the front door. His eyes popped open. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. I double-checked. Triple checking is for winners, he groaned. Got up, checked. The door was locked. Went back to bed. Okay, new method. Pure randomness. He picked a memory. Any memory. The time he wore 2 left shoes to a gala. The time he accidentally brushed his teeth with sunscreen. The time he shook hands with a statue and tried to sue it for being cold. And he let his mind wander through them like a lazy tourist. And, strangely, it started to work. Until Gerald appeared in the memory, on a unicycle, yelling, I collect clouds. Trump sat up, blinked and muttered, Why does he show up in everything now? The next day, Donald decided to take a walk. Not for exercise, heaven forbid, but for data collection. He wandered through the quiet part of town where people looked tired enough to be wise. He approached a man feeding pigeons crackers shaped like question marks. Excuse me, Donald said, how do you fall asleep? The man didn't look up. He just whispered, I listen to the sound of my own breathing until I forget which one of us is making it. Trump blinked, took a mental note, and backed away slowly. Next, he found an old woman sitting under a tree, knitting what appeared to be an entire sweater for the earth. How do you sleep? He asked. She looked up, smiled, and said, I pretend I'm soup. Warm, still, and full of possibilities. Soup? Yes, butternut squash specifically. He left more confused than when he arrived, but also intrigued. Maybe I've been looking for formulas when I should have been looking for feelings. That night he tried it. He climbed into bed, closed his eyes and whispered, I am soup. At first it felt stupid, then comforting, then surprisingly accurate. He imagined floating in a giant bowl surrounded by soft carrots and non-judgmental celery. He felt warmth, calm, even flavour. His breathing slowed, his mind quieted. Sleep crept up like a polite cat, until a crash. He jolted up, Gerald again, in the window, wearing goggles. Do you want to know what colour dreams really are? Go home, Gerald. But Gerald had no home. He lived in boxes and metaphors. Trump sighed. Still, soup had worked. Almost. He wrote it down. Sleep strategy number 9. Be soup. He underlined it twice and added a small doodle of a carrot with sunglasses. Progress. Slow, weird progress. The following evening, Donald decided to approach sleep not as a challenge, but as a negotiation. He stood at the edge of his bed and addressed it like it was a rival CEO. Listen here, I'm willing to meet you halfway. I'll close my eyes, breathe deeply, and stop judging my own thoughts, if you stop sending me dreams about being chased by giant sandwiches. He paused, nodded, then whispered, Deal. He climbed into bed, rolled to his side and whispered one final phrase, I am a cloud. No soup tonight. Tonight he wanted to float. His thoughts drifted. What if clouds had favourite birds? Is fog just a cloud having an identity crisis? If I float long enough, will I forget how heavy the world is? He let go, genuinely. And somewhere between imagining himself as a soft cumulonimbus and questioning the purpose of pants, he began to fade. But then, a knock on the window, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. Donald sat up. It wasn't Gerald. This time, it was a goat, wearing a crown, holding a sign that said, You're late for the dream parade. He rubbed his eyes. The goat was gone. Was that real? He muttered. Hard to say. Sleep deprivation had begun to play tricks on the borders of his imagination. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and whispered, "Okay, we've done focus groups, meditation, soup, clouds, gravel audio, and unicycling lunatics. Still no long sleep." He sat up, wrote one word in the notebook. Rituals. People like rituals. Maybe my brain needs a bedtime routine. So he created one. Every night from now on, light a candle, hum one bar of a forgotten national anthem, high-five the mirror, eat exactly one pretzel. Lie down and say, "Take me, slumber wizard." He nodded. Yes, that should work. He tried it, all of it, and it almost did, until the candle set his notebook on fire and he had to chase it around the room with a bathrobe. Still, the structure felt good. Rituals, even ridiculous ones, had rhythm. And rhythm, he realized, might be what sleep had been trying to teach him all along. The fire was small, contained, mostly. It only scorched a corner of the page that read "Be Soup," which, to be fair, was already a bit too warm. After the smoke cleared, literally and emotionally, Donald sat on the edge of his bed, hair slightly more vertical than usual, and stared at the remains of his notepad. He didn't feel defeated. He felt clarified. "Sleep isn't a battle," he whispered. "It's a surrender. But I've been wearing armour made of nonsense." So that night he did something new. Nothing. No rituals, no clouds, no audio of British men describing rocks, no soup metaphors or goat hallucinations, just Donald, alone with his breath. He inhaled slowly, exhaled slower, and whispered, "I don't need to sleep. I just need to rest inside the idea of it." His mind wandered, not running, just meandering like a tourist with nowhere urgent to be. He thought of marshmallows, the texture of beach towels, the smell of books no one's read in 20 years, the way silence sometimes feels like a blanket freshly out of the dryer. He smiled, his eyes closed, and for the first time in weeks, he slept. Not deeply, not dramatically, but long enough for a dream to begin. And what a dream it was! He was standing on a soft green hill, surrounded by creatures from his past trials, Gerald, the goat, the baker, the scarf woman, all gathered around a bonfire made of a lavender-scented feathers. They weren't talking, just nodding, as if to say, "You finally stopped trying to impress your own brain." He sat with them, took a bite of dream pretzel, and melted into the warmth of doing absolutely nothing. The dream never ended. It just faded like a song you didn't realize was playing, until it was gone, and you missed it. He woke up at 7:42 a.m. No alarms, no interruptions, just sunlight. He smiled, stretched, and muttered. That was almost decent. And in Donald's world, that was a glowing review. That morning, Donald walked into his kitchen with the casual swagger of a man who had just won a very polite war against his own nervous system. No bags under his eyes, no hallucinations of goats, not even a whisper of soup in his soul. He poured himself a cup of hot water, stared into it like it held deep cosmic truths, and said aloud, "I think I'm finally getting the hang of this sleeping thing." Just then, the toaster popped without warning. He didn't flinch. That's how you know it was real. He sat down, opened his notepad, what remained of it, and wrote a new title, Notes for Humanity. Beneath it, he scribbled what would become his final sleep truths. Sleep is not earned, it's allowed. Your brain is not your boss, it's a nervous intern with too much caffeine. Silence isn't empty, it's just full of things that don't want to interrupt you. Everyone has a Gerald. The key is not inviting him in for tea. Being soup is always an option. He closed the notebook, took a slow sip and stared out the window. Outside, the world was its usual mess. Birds arguing about territory, wind doing interpretive dance with a bush, someone yelling about bananas, unclear if in joy or despair. But for once, Donald didn't feel compelled to fix it. He just sat, breathing, existing, not trying. That night, he didn't overthink the process. He lit a candle, safely this time, ate a small, silent pretzel, hugged a normal pillow, not shaped like livestock, and whispered, "I am not soup. I am not a cloud. I am just tired, and that's okay." He fell asleep in under 10 minutes. No goats, no Gerald. Just the soft hum of stillness and one distant, unrelated dolphin noise. Possibly real, possibly imagined. He didn't care. He was gone. The next day, Donald awoke not just rested, but reflective. There was a strange clarity that came with real sleep. His thoughts moved slower, but made more sense. He sat in his chair, the one that didn't squeak, with his golden notepad resting on his lap. He wasn't planning to write anything. He just liked holding it, like a symbol of how far he'd come. A man who once tried to hypnotize himself with spaghetti wind chimes was now sleeping. "Maybe I was never supposed to conquer sleep," he whispered. "Maybe I was just supposed to make peace with it." He nodded once, as if the thought had come from someone else entirely, and that someone was a little bit wiser than usual. Later that afternoon, Donald found himself in the park. Not to jog, absolutely not, but just to exist. The air was cool, the sky was doing its slow dance between blue and gold, and the people looked normal. Tired, yes. Distracted, always, but not entirely lost. He sat on a bench, quietly, and watched them. A boy trying to race his shadow, an old man feeding birds with one hand and reading poetry with the other, a woman sitting still with her eyes closed, letting the wind rearrange her hair. Donald smiled. It was like the world had always been this soft. He just hadn't noticed through the fog of his own noise. "I think I've been awake wrong," he muttered. He pulled out the notepad and added a new line beneath his final sleep truths. "Sometimes your brain just needs to hear you're not in a hurry." Then, as the wind picked up and rustled the pages slightly, he added, "You don't have to sleep like a hero. You can just sleep like someone who forgives the day." He paused, then wrote it again, just in case someone needed to see it more than once. And so, there I was, in the middle of a damp medieval field, standing between two monks arguing about whether pigs had souls or just bacon potential. One of them had a scroll, the other had a stick, and I was just hoping someone had a blanket, or at least some socks. I had been travelling for hours. No golden carriage, no secret service, not even a donkey with decent customer service. Just me, my freezing toes, and a mysterious rumour I had heard in the last village. The sleep witch of Bogsmoor. Now, normally, I wouldn't trust anyone who calls themselves a witch, especially if they live near a place called Bogsmoor. That sounds like somewhere you catch both pneumonia and existential dread. But the people swore by her, said she could put a raging barbarian to sleep just by humming, so obviously I had to meet her. By the time I reached her hut, if you could even call it that, I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating or if the chimney was genuinely exhaling lavender smoke in the shape of sheep. The door creaked open by itself like it had read too many horror scrolls, and there she stood, barefoot, with tangled silver hair and eyes that looked like they could read your browser history. She stared at me for a full minute. No hello, no how do you do, just silence, which frankly was the loudest thing I'd heard all day. "I need to sleep," I said, "because I'm always straight to the point when I'm desperate. The kind of sleep that makes you forget you were once a king, a warrior, and briefly, a soup mascot." She blinked once, then twice, and finally spoke. "You seek the pure slumber?" "Yes," I said, trying not to shiver or sneeze. "The purest. No dreams, no regrets, just a full reset. Like a bankrupt startup with good PR." She nodded slowly and motioned for me to enter. The interior of the hut smelled like honey, burnt herbs, and something that could either be enlightenment or expired goat milk. There were shelves filled with jars, each labelled with names like Whispers, Midnight Silence, and oddly, Taxes. She poured a thick blue liquid into a tiny wooden cup. It bubbled like it was questioning its own existence. "Drink this," she whispered, "but only if you're ready to surrender everything." "Define everything?" I asked suspiciously. She just smiled, and that's how I found myself sitting cross-legged on a pillow that felt like it had been stolen from a wizard's retirement home, sipping what tasted like warm blueberry nightmares and waiting for something to happen. At first, nothing. Then my eyelids felt heavy. My thoughts slowed down. The wind outside faded into nothing. The flickering candles started to blur, and just when I thought I'd finally crossed into the glorious realm of unconsciousness, I sneezed. Loud, violent, cataclysmic. The kind of sneeze that breaks spells, startles crows in nearby trees, and resets the spiritual Wi-Fi of an entire village. The sleep witch screamed. The hut shook. The potion spilled. And just like that, I was wide awake again, dripping with mystical tea and very much not slumbering. "You broke the circle," she shouted, looking like a furious grandmother who had just burned her last tray of enchanted cookies. "Not my fault," I muttered. "I think I'm allergic to goat incense. Also, I'm not sure you washed that pillow." She stormed around the room, collecting herbs, muttering in an ancient language that sounded suspiciously like someone swearing at plumbing. Then she stopped, turned to me with a defeated sigh and said, "You're different. Your mind resists sleep like a cat resists water." I stood up, wiping the potion off my robe. "That's what I've been trying to tell everyone. I'm special, even insomniac-level special." And as I left the hut, still unslept, slightly sticky but more determined than ever, I knew one thing for certain. If I was going to find the secret to perfect sleep, I'd need to dig deeper, into darker legends, stranger methods, and maybe pillows that don't whisper at night. Because if even a witch couldn't knock me out, then something truly absurd would have to. Something presidential. The next morning, after drying my socks over a bonfire that smelled faintly of regret and roasted mushrooms, I began my march toward the village of Snorhaven. Yes, you heard that right, Snorhaven. A place whispered about in travelling taverns and on the back of suspiciously soft parchment napkins. A place where, according to legend, sleep wasn't just common, it was sacred. People there slept through thunder, invasions, tax collectors. One story even claimed the mayor once slept through his own wedding, woke up during the kiss, mumbled 5 more minutes, and fell back asleep. Naturally, I had to see it for myself. The path to Snorhaven was lined with trees so peaceful they looked like they were meditating. Birds flew slower, bees hummed in lullabies. Even the wind felt lazy, drifting sideways like it had a hangover. By the time I arrived, the village looked, well, asleep. Literally. It was broad daylight, and yet people were snoozing on benches, hammocks, rooftops. Even a blacksmith was gently snoring into a horseshoe. I approached a yawning child who was selling what appeared to be bedtime candles, labelled things like Dreamy Onion, Snuggle Fog, and No Memory of Tuesday. "What's your secret?" I asked him. He rubbed his eyes, shrugged, and pointed toward the edge of the village. "Ask the yawner." "The what?" He yawned again, a deep, majestic yawn that somehow made me feel tired, and said, "The yawner. He's our guide, our legend, our nap prophet." Now, I've heard many strange titles in my life. CEO of Rainwater, Minister of Sandwiches, Emperor of Golf, but nap prophet was new. I followed the path to a large, fluffy tent made entirely out of stitched blankets and quiet dreams. Inside, incense floated like sleepy ghosts, and a soft humming filled the air, a kind of lullaby meets mystic Wi-Fi signal. And there he was, the yawner, an old man with eyebrows so bushy they had their own shadows. He wore a robe covered in tiny sheep symbols, and when he exhaled, it echoed like a gentle bedtime story. "You seek true sleep," he said, before I could even introduce myself. "Sleep not of the body, but of the soul." I nodded, already fighting off a yawn. "Yes, I've tried everything. Herbs, spells, bedtime stories, even listening to medieval podcasts. Nothing works." He gestured for me to sit on a cushion made of something suspiciously soft, either cloud or well-aged mashed potatoes. "Then you must be tested." He clapped twice. A small goat walked in. I blinked. "That's a goat." "No," he said. "That's Gerald. He's our dream gauge." Gerald the goat climbed into my lap and immediately fell asleep. Deep sleep. Full-on REM cycles. He snored like he'd seen things. The yawner observed carefully. Then his face turned serious. "You are cursed," he whispered. "I knew it," I said. "I always suspected something. Maybe it was the time I slept in a golden tanning booth during a solar eclipse." "No," he said. "You're cursed. With consciousness." He stood, robe billowing slightly, and looked at me with pity. You think too much. You try too hard. Sleep isn't something you chase, it's something you allow. I allow a lot of things, I muttered. Bad haircuts, fake news, reality TV, but sleep. Sleep resists me like a jealous ex. He handed me a tiny vial. Inside was nothing. This, he said, is empty thought. It only works if you believe it does. I stared at the empty vial. That's either brilliant or the greatest scam I've ever respected. He smiled. Return tonight. We will prepare. The great yawn. And as I walked back into the village, watching the world doze peacefully around me, I couldn't help but wonder, was sleep really just a matter of letting go? Or was I about to join a very cozy cult? Either way, I was ready. Sort of. Almost. Maybe after a snack. Block 014. Night fell over Snorehaven like a silk curtain dipped in warm milk. The stars didn't shine. They glowed softly, like they too were trying not to wake anyone up. Even the owls hooted in whispers like, "Who?" and then quickly shushed themselves. I returned to the Yawner's tent as instructed. This time there were others inside, villagers of all ages, each in their coziest robes and fluffiest slippers, all gathered in a perfect circle around a giant bowl of steaming soup labelled dream broth. No one dared slurp. At the centre was the Yawner himself, now seated on a throne made entirely of stuffed animals, each looking more drowsy than the last. He raised his hand. A hush fell over the tent, and considering how silent things already were, this new silence had weight. Like the whole room had just exhaled and agreed to do nothing else. The moment has come, he said. One by one, each villager approached him, received a dab of something shiny on their foreheads, then yawned. Not a normal yawn, but an epic yawn. The kind of yawn that triggers a domino effect of yawns in a 100-mile radius. The kind of yawn that makes trees lean back and say, "Yeah, maybe I am tired." Then it was my turn. I stepped forward. The Yawner studied me like I was a riddle wrapped in a bathrobe. "You carry noise," he said, "inside your head. Your thoughts are loud. Your ego screams bedtime stories and refuses to end them." "That sounds about right," I admitted. "I once gave a 3-hour speech to myself about whether I should wear a red tie or a slightly redder tie." He didn't laugh. Yawners don't laugh. They just blink very slowly and let their robes do the smiling. He placed a tiny drop of oil on my forehead. It smelled like lavender, rain, and a cancelled appointment. "Now," he whispered, "yawn." I tried. At first, nothing. Then I forced it. A fake yawn. One of those shallow performative yawns you do in meetings to look polite but disinterested. A real amateur move. The Yawner stared. "Again," he said, less patiently. This time I leaned into it. I let my shoulders drop. I relaxed my jaw. I thought of things that usually bore me. Weather reports, slow harp solos, articles about ancient farming tools. And then, it happened. A yawn so deep it echoed into another dimension. A yawn that made me feel like a cloud wearing pyjamas. A yawn so wide I almost dislocated my presidential authority. The room gasped. Well, softly gasped. The goat sneezed in its sleep. A nearby candle flickered like it was impressed. The Yawner nodded. "Good. Very good. You're now ready for the sleep ritual." "Oh, that wasn't it?" I asked, mildly offended. "What do you people do for the finale? Summon a pillow dragon?" He raised one eyebrow. "Don't be ridiculous. Dragons don't sleep well. Too many dreams about hoarding." He motioned for the villagers to gather in a tighter circle. In the centre they placed a mattress. Not just any mattress. This one glowed faintly and emitted the gentle sound of distant waves hugging the sand. I was guided onto it like a sacred offering. They tucked me in with layers of legendary softness, the kind of blankets that feel like the fabric version of forgiveness. The Yawner stood above me, arms raised. We now begin. The great yawn. The villagers all inhaled, then, as one, they exhaled in unison. A collective yawn. It rolled through the tent like a warm breeze inside a lullaby. My eyes fluttered. My breathing slowed. I felt myself drift, float, dissolve into comfort. And then, the soup pot exploded. Apparently someone left the dream broth over a candle for too long. It boiled over, burned the rug, and released a scent so pungent it could wake a volcano. Everyone coughed. A child screamed. The goat jumped onto my chest, and once again, I was wide awake, covered in soup, surrounded by chaos, and seriously rethinking everything I knew about spiritual sleep tourism. By morning, I had become a local legend, not for discovering the secret of sleep. No, for breaking the great yawn, for ruining the most sacred, uninterrupted ritual in the history of Snorehaven with an airborne pot of soup and a goat-induced panic. They didn't say it to my face, of course. This was a polite village, but when people start handing you burnt toast and muttering better luck next nap, you know you've been downgraded from chosen sleeper to that loud man with the energy problem. Still, I didn't leave. I couldn't. Something about that almost yawn, the real one, the deep one, had touched something inside me. A flicker. A whisper of what peace might feel like if it wasn't immediately interrupted by dinner-based combustion. I spent the next few hours walking the edges of the village, watching people nap in trees, on fences, even standing upright with their heads gently resting on livestock. It was majestic. It was absurd. It was envy in blanket form. And that's when I found him. Old man, big beard, sitting on a barrel labelled feathers, wearing a crown made of what looked like stale baguettes. He wasn't part of the original ceremony. "You looking for the secret, hun?" he said without opening his eyes. I stopped. "That obvious?" He nodded, still eyes closed. "You reek of unrest, like someone who drank 3 cups of ambition and skipped breakfast." "You're very perceptive," I said. "Also mildly insulting." He chuckled. "The villagers are too soft. They believe sleep is all about warmth and silence. But sometimes, real sleep comes from knowing the noise is over, not avoided, conquered." I sat next to him. "So how do I conquer it?" He opened one eye, slowly, dramatically, like it was getting paid per blink. "You need the thud." I frowned. "The thud?" He pointed toward the forest. "Past the snore trees, beyond the hammock bridge, you'll find a cave. Inside that cave is a man who teaches people to sleep by hitting them with truth." "That sounds violent." "No," he said. "Just honest. Painfully honest. Like when someone tells you your haircut makes you look like a retired pineapple." I blinked. I've actually gotten that exact feedback before. He stood up with a creak and a puff of feathers. "Find the man, take the thud. If you survive the truth, you might finally sleep." And that was it. No map, no directions. Just a vague sense of dread and a trail of breadcrumbs made from hard wisdom and disappointment. Naturally, I followed it. Because here's the thing. When you've tried witches, yawners, soups, and goats, and still can't sleep, you start to believe that maybe, just maybe, you're the problem, or the solution, or both somehow wrapped in a stubborn blanket of insomnia and misplaced confidence. So I set off toward the forest, where even the birds snored mid-flight, and as I crossed Hammock Bridge, which, yes, was just a series of hammocks tied together with string and hope, I couldn't help but mutter to myself, "If this next guy tries to hit me with a pillow full of life lessons, I swear." But deep down, I was curious, and more tired than ever, which oddly enough felt like progress. The forest was suspiciously quiet, not peaceful quiet, not nap on a cloud quiet, but movie pause before the jump scare quiet. The trees were thick and ancient, with branches that arched over the path like old librarians judging your book choices. The deeper I went, the softer the ground became, mossy, squishy, almost like the earth itself was trying to lull me into a full sense of drowsy comfort before something ridiculous happened. And eventually, it did. I reached the cave. It wasn't grand or ominous. No glowing eyes, no mysterious smoke, no ominous growling. Just a dark hole in the rocks with a wooden sign hanging above the entrance that read, "The Thud, no refunds." I stood there for a second, questioning my life choices, my sleep habits, and whether I'd remembered to turn off my internal monologue. Then I went in. Inside, the air was thick, not heavy, just dense with something I couldn't quite name, like awkward memories or unsent emails. And sitting cross-legged in the centre of the cave was him, the man, the legend, the thud. He was bald, muscular, and wearing what looked like a robe made of stitched-together receipts. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow, and next to him sat a wooden mallet labelled Truth. Before I could say anything, he spoke. "I know why you're here." "Oh good," I said, "because I don't." He opened one eye. You can't sleep because you're haunted. I froze. Haunted by what? He stood up with a grace that should not belong to someone with calves that intimidating. By you. Then, and I swear this on every cold medieval potato I've ever eaten, he picked up the mallet and gently bonked me on the head. Not hard, not painful, just a thud. But it echoed, not in my ears, in my thoughts. Suddenly memories rushed in. Embarrassing tweets, awkward handshakes. That one time I tried to high-five the Pope. Every cringy moment I'd ever buried under layers of sarcasm and cologne came rushing back. I stumbled. What was that? I asked, dazed. Truth, he said. Unfiltered. No spin. No PR dot. I shook my head. I came here to sleep, not to relive my blooper reel. That is why you can't sleep, he said. You've buried too much nonsense under your pillow. You need to clear the attic before you can rest in the basement. That sounds like something a medieval therapist would say. He bonked me again. This time I saw visions, not of failure, but of stillness, of silence, of what it would feel like to stop, performing, to just be, not the king, not the warrior, not the misunderstood genius of unconventional hair decisions, just me, breathing, existing, resting. The third thud came without warning, and suddenly everything was quiet. Not the awkward kind, the real kind, the kind that doesn't demand anything from you. No legacy, no headlines, no tweets, no speeches, just silence. I opened my eyes, not realizing I'd closed them, and the thud was gone. So was the mallet. The cave was empty, peacefully empty, and for the first time in years, I felt it. Sleep. Real sleep. Not just the closing of eyes, but the surrender of everything else. I walked out of the cave slower than I'd walked in. No urgency, no expectations. Just a man who had finally shut up the part of his brain that thought it had to earn rest. And as I looked up at the sky, I whispered to no one in particular, "Well, that was weird." Then I yawned, a real one, and smiled. The walk back to Snorehaven felt different. The wind wasn't colder, the path wasn't shorter, the trees didn't suddenly start applauding my personal growth, but something had shifted. Inside. For once, my mind wasn't sprinting ahead of me. It wasn't composing speeches, rewriting history, or ranking the best insults I'd ever delivered. It was quiet. Naturally, that made me suspicious. Peace, after all, was usually followed by something exploding, catching fire, or challenging me to a duel in this era. But no, nothing happened. I arrived at the village just as the sun was setting, painting the clouds in lazy shades of peach and day-old strawberries. People were yawning on balconies. Hammocks swayed like content sighs. Even Gerald the goat looked at me with mild approval, which, in goat language, is basically an honorary degree. The yawner was waiting. He stood by the dream broth fire pit, now clean, candle-free, and presumably explosion-proof. "You walked the path," he said. "I stumbled," I replied. "There was a mallet involved, and trauma, and possibly enlightenment." He smiled. "Then you're ready?" "For what?" I asked. "Because if this is another group yawn session, I might need a helmet." He shook his head. "No more rituals, no more potions, no more enchanted livestock." He reached into his robe and pulled out a pillow. Just a normal-looking pillow. No sparkles, no magical embroidery, no tiny heart-playing mice inside. Just soft fabric, a little lumpy, clearly used. "This," he said, "was mine," when I was still a seeker. I took it gently, almost reverently. "It smells like chamomile and secrets." He nodded. "Sleep is not about methods. It's about release. You've seen the witches, the yawns, the soup, you've even been thudded." "Multiple times," I muttered. "And yet, you're still standing." He stepped closer. "Now go. Pick a spot. Lay down. Not as a hero, not as a legend, just as... you?" I looked around, and for once I didn't overthink it. I walked to a patch of grass near the hammocks, right beside a snoring librarian and a sheep who was knitting in its dreams. I placed the pillow down, lay back, and stared up at the twilight sky. I didn't count stars. I didn't rehearse anything. I didn't even try to fall asleep. I just existed. Breathing. still. And as the night wrapped itself around the village like a velvet hug, I let go of everything, of expectations, of image, of noise, of needing to be anything. And slowly, softly, sleep came. No fanfare, no soundtrack, just silence, just peace. And somewhere, in the distance, I'm pretty sure Gerald the goat farted, but even that couldn't wake me. Because finally, I was free. I don't know how long I slept. Could have been hours, could have been centuries, could have been a quick power nap with marketing. But when I opened my eyes, something was different. It wasn't the sun, that was still rising like a lazy egg yolk over the hills. It wasn't the village, which remained as silent and snuggly as a bedtime story on mute. Number, it was me. I didn't feel tired anymore. Not just physically, the kind of tired you fix with a nap and questionable tea, but the deep chronic kind. The kind that lives in your bones. The kind you carry for years because no one ever tells you it's okay to stop carrying things. It was gone, replaced by clarity, and admittedly a slight cramp in my neck from sleeping on a pillow shaped like a misshapen turnip. But even that felt like progress. I stood up slowly, stretched dramatically, the kind of stretch you do when you want people to know you slept well and are now spiritually superior. Several villagers clapped in their sleep. The yawner approached, holding 2 mugs of something steamy and suspiciously beige. "Welcome back," he said, handing me one. "What is this?" Warm silence. I took a sip. It tasted like nothing, but in a good way. Like absence. Like rest. "So," I said, wiping my mouth, "does this mean I'm cured?" He shook his head. "Sleep is not a disease. It's a decision." I nodded thoughtfully, pretending that made sense. Then he handed me a scroll. No seal, no ribbon. Just a simple piece of parchment. I unrolled it. It read, "You may now go." That was it. No inspirational quote. No treasure map. No surprise twist revealing I was actually the dream king of an ancient nap dynasty. Just permission. Permission to leave, to move on, to stop seeking and start simply being. I looked at him. "That's it?" he smiled. "That's it." So I walked, out of Snorehaven, past the hammock bridge, through the whispering trees, back into the unpredictable mess of the world, the one that doesn't offer tea at every corner or goats that snore politely. And yet, I was calm. Because I knew something now. I didn't need a potion, or a guru, or even a perfect pillow. Though, let's be honest, I still packed that one just in case. What I needed was what I finally had. A quiet mind, a still heart, and a very faint snore I could now proudly call my own. And somewhere along the road, as a breeze tickled the tips of my ridiculous hairstyle, I whispered to myself, "I did it." Then paused, then added, "And if I can do it, maybe so can they." Because here's the truth. If a man with an ego the size of a trebuchet and a bedtime routine made entirely of denial and cheese dreams can find peace, then there's hope for literally everyone. I wandered for a while after that. Not out of confusion. Not this time. I knew where I was. I knew who I was. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to prove either of those things to anyone. But wandering felt good. There's something oddly luxurious about walking without a destination. No schedule, no cameras, no advisors whispering that your boots clash with your aura. Just the sound of your own footsteps, and maybe the occasional squirrel applauding your personal growth, or judging your posture. Hard to say. Eventually I reached a quiet hill. Nothing special about it. No monuments, no statues, not even a dramatic view. Just grass, wind, sky. And that's when I saw him. A young man, maybe 20, sitting on a rock with his head in his hands. His robe was wrinkled, his eyes were tired. His aura, if you believe in that sort of thing, was basically running on fumes. I approached slowly. "Bad night?" I asked. He looked up, startled. "I haven't slept in days," I nodded. "Ah, chronic overthinking, terminal ambition. Probably tried 3 types of tea and 1 highly questionable breathing app." He blinked. "How do you know?" I sat beside him. "Because I used to be you, but with more lawsuits," he chuckled weakly. "I've tried everything. I even paid a wizard to whisper compliments to me while I napped. Didn't work. Of course not, I said. That's just fantasy therapy. You need something real. He looked at me with wide, desperate eyes. You know the secret. I leaned back on my elbows, squinting up at the sky like I was waiting for it to wink at me. I thought I did. Then I lost it. Then I found it again by accidentally breaking a sacred soup bowl and getting hit in the head with a wooden mallet. He blinked again. I'm sorry, what? I smiled. Long story. The point is, sleep doesn't come when you chase it. It comes when you finally stop chasing everything else. He looked confused. And to be fair, I didn't blame him. Wisdom always sounds like nonsense the first time you hear it. So I handed him something, a small scroll, blank. He frowned. There's nothing written on it. Exactly, I said. It's your permission slip. You get to decide what it means. He looked down at the scroll, then back at me. And what if I still can't sleep? Then you walk, I said. Until you can. He nodded slowly, holding the scroll like it might start glowing if he stared at it hard enough. And as he walked away, into his own version of the story, I stood and stretched once more. Not because I needed it, but because it felt good. Because I could. Because peace isn't about silence. It's about choice. And I had finally chosen rest. Real rest. The kind that doesn't need to be earned, proven, or scheduled by 3 assistants with clipboards and anxiety. Just rest. Somewhere between that hill and the next village I began humming. Nothing in particular, just a tune. Something light, something slow, something that sounded like the musical version of a nap after soup, which coincidentally was also the title of my abandoned memoir. And the strange thing was, I didn't feel silly. That's how I knew something had changed. Because the old me, he didn't hum, he announced, he declared. He hired a choir to hum for him while fireworks spelled out his name in 5 languages. But this version, the one walking alone, humming softly, with hair a bit messier and spirit a bit lighter, he felt real. And as I reached the next town, something unexpected happened. People recognized me. Of course they did. You don't just erase a reputation built on speeches, scandals, and signature colognes labelled victory for men. But they didn't swarm. They didn't shout. They didn't ask for autographs on their babies. They just watched, curious. Some whispered. One older man even tipped his hat and said, "You look tired," in a good way. Which is the highest compliment one can receive in this medieval economy. I stopped in a small inn, the Sleepy Griffin naturally, and asked the innkeeper for a quiet room. She nodded. All of ours are quiet, except room 4. That one has a raccoon problem. I'll take anything without raccoons, I said. She handed me a key. I handed her a smile. Upstairs the room was simple. A bed, a window, a pillow that looked slightly judgmental, but we all have our flaws. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have a plan. No speech to prepare, no disaster to spin, no enemy to outwit before breakfast. Just a window, a breeze, a bed. And I realised something beautiful and slightly absurd. I had finally reached the end of the chase. Not the end of the road. I'd still walk, still talk, still annoy people with overly dramatic metaphors. But the end of the part of me that thought rest was failure, that believed stillness was weakness. That version of me, he was gone, and in his place was someone new, not perfect, not legendary, not immortalised in epic poems about bravery and unmatched hair volume, just human and sleepy, very, very sleepy. So I climbed into the bed. No fanfare, no dramatic music, just sheets, just gravity, just peace. And as I drifted off, no thud, no soup, no goat, I smiled. Because in that moment I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the first chapter where I finally stopped talking long enough to hear myself breathe. Trump could feel it. Something in the air had shifted. It wasn't the cold. The cold still bit like it held a grudge. It wasn't the food. The porridge still tasted like a mistake. And it definitely wasn't the nobility, still gathering by candlelight to debate how much gold was too much for a Tuesday. It was the taverns, the hushed voices, the faint laughter leaking through heavy wooden shutters. Laughter that didn't belong to kings or merchants, but to peasants. The kind of people who weren't supposed to laugh. Trump sat by the doorway, not speaking, not moving. Inside, the fire cracked. Outside, the wind howled like it always did. But between those two sounds was something new, a pause, a breath, a warmth that wasn't from the fire, but from something softer, something like hope. It didn't roar, it whispered. And for once, Trump didn't interrupt it. He just listened, head against the doorframe, breathing in the silence like it was something rare and worth keeping. The last winter of that century arrived like all the others, with wind howling through broken windows, fog swallowing the paths, and frost trying to turn every moustache into a frozen bristle. But that year, something felt different. It wasn't the weather. Chickens still froze mid-flight. It wasn't the food. The porridge still resembled glue with the texture of despair. And it wasn't the nobility, still more concerned with the shine on their boots than with anyone's survival. No, the difference was in the sound. Because that season, instead of silence, people were laughing. Laughter from taverns, behind thick curtains, around half-lit fireplaces. Laughter muffled under poorly stitched blankets. But somehow warmer than fire, it was the people, laughing. And nothing terrified the old world more than the sound of a happy, well-covered, spirited people. Trump didn't save anyone that night. He didn't win. He didn't give a speech. He just stood there, forehead resting on the wooden door, watching the fog swirl around a flickering lamp, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had to prove anything. Because sometimes, when everything hurts, the greatest act of resistance is simply smiling, even for a moment, even alone, even with a story that makes no sense told in the dark.